I never thought a solar heating panel would land me in court, but that's exactly what happened when Patricia Morrison decided my energy-efficient roof system violated the aesthetic standards of Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association in Boulder, Colorado. The trouble started on a crisp October morning when I was drinking coffee on my back patio, admiring the new solar thermal collectors I'd installed just 2 weeks prior. My name is Brandon Garrison, and I'd spent nearly 3 months researching the best renewable heating system for my 3-bedroom ranch house. The installation had cost me $12,000, but with Colorado's harsh winters and my commitment to reducing my carbon footprint, it seemed like the perfect investment. The panels were sleek, black, and mounted flush against my south-facing roof. They looked professional, modern, and frankly, I thought they enhanced the appearance of my home. That peaceful morning shattered when Patricia came marching up my driveway, her perfectly styled blonde hair bouncing with each aggressive step. She wore a pristine white blazer despite the early hour, and her face had that pinched expression I'd come to recognize over the past year since she'd been elected HOA president. "Brandon Garrison," she called out, waving a manila folder in the air like it was evidence at a murder trial. "We need to talk about those unsightly panels on your roof." I set down my coffee mug slowly, already feeling my blood pressure rise. "Good morning to you too, Patricia. What seems to be the problem?" She thrust the folder toward me as she reached the patio. "This is a formal notice of violation. Those solar panels, or whatever they are, were not approved by the Architectural Review Committee. You have 30 days to remove them, or you'll face daily fines of $100. I took the folder but didn't open it. "Patricia, these aren't solar panels for electricity. They're solar thermal collectors for heating water and supplementing my home heating system. And I submitted the required paperwork to the ARC 2 months ago. I have the certified mail receipt." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I am the chair of the ARC, and I never approved any such installation. Our community standards clearly state that all exterior modifications must maintain the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. Those panels are visible from the street and create an eyesore." "They're barely visible from the street," I countered, struggling to keep my voice level. "You'd have to stand at a specific angle to even see them." And according to Colorado Revised Statutes Section 38-33.3-209.5, HOAs cannot prohibit solar energy devices. Patricia's face flushed red. "Don't you dare lecture me about the law, young man. I've been on this board for 15 years, and I know exactly what we can and cannot regulate. Those statutes apply to solar electric panels, not your heating contraptions. You will remove them, or you will face the consequences." She spun on her heel and marched away before I could respond. I stood there, folder in hand, watching her pristine white SUV pull out of my driveway. The coffee had gone cold, and my peaceful morning had evaporated completely. Inside the folder, I found a formally typed violation notice on HOA letterhead, complete with a citation to the community's covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Section 12, subsection 4, paragraph B stated that all roof-mounted equipment must be approved by the ARC and must not be visible from any public street or neighboring property. The letter was signed by Patricia Morrison, ARC chair, and dated that very day. I immediately went to my home office and pulled out my files. Sure enough, I had copies of everything. My application to the ARC, submitted on August 15th. The detailed plans showing the panel placement, dimensions, and specifications. Photographs of similar installations. A letter from my installer certifying that the system met all building codes and manufacturer specifications. And most importantly, the certified mail receipt showing that Patricia Morrison had signed for the package on August 17th. This wasn't an oversight. This was deliberate. I spent the rest of that day calling neighbors who served on the HOA board. The first was Tom Chen, the treasurer, who'd always seemed reasonable during the quarterly meetings. "Brandon, hey," Tom said when he answered. His voice had that careful neutrality that told me he already knew why I was calling. "Look, I heard about the roof thing. Patricia sent an email to the whole board last night. Tom, I submitted all the proper paperwork. She received it 2 months ago. This system is legal under state law." I know, Tom sighed. But Patricia is convinced that the solar exemption doesn't apply to heating systems, only photovoltaic panels. She's got the board backing her up on this. Says it sets a bad precedent if we let people put whatever they want on their roofs. It's not whatever I want. It's a legitimate renewable energy system that's going to reduce my natural gas consumption by 60%. And the law doesn't distinguish between photovoltaic and thermal systems. It says solar energy devices, period. Tom was quiet for a moment. "You should come to the next board meeting. It's scheduled for next Thursday at 7. You can present your case to everyone." "I'll be there," I said. The next week crawled by. I spent hours researching Colorado HOA law, reading court cases, and documenting everything. I printed out the relevant statutes, highlighted the key passages, and prepared a presentation that would make my position crystal clear. I even contacted my installer, Mike Rodriguez from Summit Solar Solutions, and asked him to prepare a letter explaining the system's benefits and legal standing. The Thursday board meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a modest building near the neighborhood entrance. When I arrived at 6:45, Patricia was already there, arranging papers at the head table like a prosecutor preparing for trial. 3 other board members sat along the table: Tom Chen, Rebecca Phillips the secretary, and James Hartford the vice president. About 15 other homeowners filled the audience chairs, which surprised me. Word had apparently spread about the dispute. Patricia called the meeting to order at 7 sharp. She ran through the standard agenda items with military precision: approval of last month's minutes, financial report, landscaping updates. Finally, 40 minutes in, she reached new business. "We have a violation matter to address," Patricia announced, looking directly at me. "Brandon Garrison has installed unauthorized roof equipment that violates our community standards. Brandon, you have 5 minutes to address the board." I walked to the front, carrying my folder of documents. "Thank you. As most of you know, I installed a solar thermal heating system on my roof in September. This system uses solar collectors to heat water, which then supplements my home heating system. It's environmentally friendly, reduces my energy costs, and is completely legal under Colorado law." I distributed copies of the statute to each board member. Colorado Revised Statutes Section 38-33.3-209.5 specifically states that HOAs cannot prohibit solar energy devices. The law defines these devices as any system that captures and converts solar radiation. That includes both photovoltaic systems and thermal collectors like mine. Patricia barely glanced at the papers. That statute applies to solar panels for electricity generation. "Your heating system is not covered." "Actually, it is," I continued. "The statute doesn't distinguish between electricity and heat. Solar energy is solar energy. Furthermore, I submitted a complete application to the Architectural Review Committee on August 15th. I have the certified mail receipt showing you personally received it on August 17th. You had 30 days to respond under our CCRs. You didn't respond at all, which under standard contract law constitutes approval by silence. Rebecca Phillips, the secretary, looked uncomfortable. Patricia, did we receive Brandon's application? We received something, Patricia said dismissively. But it was incomplete and didn't include all required specifications. I pulled out another document. Here's a complete copy of what I submitted. Floor plans, roof diagrams, system specifications, installer certifications, and photos of comparable installations. Everything your ARC checklist requires. James Hartford, the vice president, reached for the copy. He was a retired engineer, methodical and detail-oriented. He studied the documents for several minutes while the room sat in awkward silence. "This looks complete to me," James finally said. "Patricia, why wasn't this brought to the full committee for review?" Patricia's face flushed. "Because it was obviously non-compliant. I didn't want to waste everyone's time." "That's not how the ARC process works," James said, his voice taking on an edge. "Applications are supposed to be reviewed by the full committee. You can't just unilaterally reject something." "I am the chair," Patricia snapped. "I have the authority to make preliminary determinations." Tom Chen leaned forward. "Patricia, I think we need to reconsider this. If Brandon followed the proper procedure and the state law is on his side, we could be exposing the HOA to legal liability." "There is no legal liability," Patricia insisted. "This board has a duty to maintain property values and aesthetic standards. If we let Brandon keep his ugly heating panels, next thing you know, everyone will want to install them. Our neighborhood will look like an industrial park." One of the homeowners in the audience raised her hand. It was Deanne Wilson, who lived 3 houses down from me. "I'd like to speak if that's allowed." Patricia looked annoyed but nodded. 2 minutes. Deanne stood up. "I think Brandon's system looks fine. I can barely see it from the street. And honestly, I've been researching the same kind of system for my house. With natural gas prices going up every year, these heating systems make financial sense. I don't understand why the HOA would want to prevent people from saving money and helping the environment." Another homeowner spoke up. "I agree. This seems like overreach." Patricia banged her gavel. "This is not a town hall. The board will deliberate and issue a decision. Brandon, you'll receive our response in writing within 10 business days. I gathered my documents. I hope you'll make the right choice. But if you don't, I want you to know that I will take legal action to protect my rights under state law." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening this board?" "I'm informing you of my intentions. I've invested $12,000 in a legal, environmentally responsible system. I'm not removing it because you personally don't like how it looks." The meeting adjourned shortly after. Tom Chen pulled me aside in the parking lot. "Brandon, between you and me, I think you're right," he said quietly. "But Patricia is dug in on this. She sees it as a challenge to her authority. She's going to push for enforcement no matter what." "Then I'll see her in court," I said. 10 days later, I received the board's written decision. By a vote of 3-2 with Tom and James dissenting, the board upheld Patricia's violation notice. I had 20 days remaining to remove the system or face daily fines of $100. I immediately called my attorney, Martin Shaw, who I'd been consulting throughout the process. Martin specialized in HOA law and had a reputation for taking on overzealous boards. "Well, they gave us no choice," Martin said after I read him the decision letter. "We'll file a complaint in Boulder County District Court. We'll seek a declaratory judgment that your system is protected under state law, an injunction preventing the HOA from fining you, and damages for your legal fees." How long will this take? Hard to say. Could be 6 months, could be a year, but we have a strong case. The statute is clear and you followed all the proper procedures. Let's do it." Martin filed the complaint 2 weeks later. The HOA had to hire their own attorney, a process that took another month and depleted a significant portion of their reserve fund, as Tom later told me. Their attorney, Richard Vance, was known for aggressive tactics and expensive hourly rates. The case was assigned to Judge Helen Morrison, no relation to Patricia despite the shared last name. Judge Morrison had a reputation for being fair but no nonsense. She didn't tolerate games or delays. The first hearing was scheduled for late January, 3 months after the initial violation notice. In the meantime, the HOA began assessing the daily fines against my account, $100 per day, adding up quickly. Martin assured me we could recover those in the lawsuit, but watching the numbers climb was stressful nonetheless. Winter settled over Boulder with a vengeance that year. We had several snowstorms in December, and temperatures regularly dropped below zero at night. My solar thermal system performed beautifully. Even on cloudy days, it captured enough solar radiation to preheat my water and reduce the load on my natural gas furnace. My utility bills dropped by more than half compared to the previous winter. Meanwhile, Patricia escalated her campaign against me. She sent letters to all homeowners warning about the dangers of unauthorized modifications. She posted on the neighborhood Facebook group, claiming that my system could cause roof damage and voided insurance coverage. When I posted rebuttals with facts and documentation, she had the moderator remove my comments. She also started conducting what she called compliance inspections throughout the neighborhood, looking for any minor violation she could find. Several neighbors received notices about trash, cans visible from the street, holiday decorations that stayed up too long, or grass that was a 1/4 inch too tall. The neighborhood, which had always been friendly and relaxed, became tense and divided. Some neighbors supported me. Deanne Wilson and her husband put up a small sign in their yard saying, "Solar power equals property rights." Others sided with Patricia, believing that HOA rules existed for good reasons and should be followed regardless of personal opinion. The January hearing was preliminary, just establishing the schedule and scope of discovery. Both sides had to exchange documents and provide responses to written questions. Martin subpoenaed all of the HOA's ARC records for the past 5 years, looking for evidence of selective enforcement or procedural irregularities. What he found was damning. Patricia had personally approved dozens of exterior modifications over the years, many without bringing them before the full ARC committee. She'd approved new paint colors, fence installations, deck additions, and even satellite dishes, all with just her signature. But she'd also denied several applications without explanation or committee review. Mostly for homeowners, she'd had personal disputes with. One particularly telling example involved a homeowner named Craig Peterson, who'd wanted to install a small wind turbine for electricity generation. Patricia had denied it immediately, claiming it would be noisy and unsightly. Craig had dropped the matter rather than fight the board. When Martin contacted Craig for a statement, he was eager to help, still angry about his denied application from 3 years earlier. Martin also discovered that Patricia had never called a single ARC committee meeting since becoming chair. She'd made all decisions unilaterally, despite the CCRs requiring committee review of all applications. The real trial was scheduled for June. In the months leading up to it, both sides prepared their cases. The HOA's attorney, Richard Vance, tried to argue that the solar exemption in Colorado law was ambiguous and subject to reasonable restrictions by HOAs. He filed briefs citing case law from other states, where courts had allowed HOAs to regulate the placement and appearance of solar installations. Martin countered with Colorado-specific cases and administrative rulings from the state's Division of Real Estate, which oversees HOA regulations. Every piece of guidance from the state supported our position. Solar thermal systems were protected under the same statute as photovoltaic panels, and HOAs could not prohibit them. By the time June arrived, my legal bills had exceeded $8,000. The HOA's fines against me had accumulated to over $20,000, though Martin had obtained a temporary restraining order preventing them from placing a lien on my house until the case was resolved. The trial was scheduled for 3 days, though Judge Morrison made it clear she expected both sides to be efficient with their time. The courtroom was modern, with light wood paneling and comfortable seating. Martin and I sat at the plaintiff's table on the left. Richard Vance and Patricia Morrison sat at the defense table on the right. Patricia wore a navy blue suit and had her hair pulled back severely, giving her an even more pinched appearance than usual. Judge Morrison entered promptly at 9. She was in her late 50s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Good morning," she said. "We're here for Garrison versus Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. This is a declaratory judgment action regarding the interpretation of Colorado's solar rights statute and its application to homeowners association covenants. Mr. Shaw, you may present your opening statement." Martin stood. He was in his mid-40s, with an easy confidence that came from knowing his case inside and out. "Thank you, Your Honor. This case is about a homeowners association that tried to prohibit what Colorado law explicitly protects. The facts are straightforward. Mr. Garrison installed a solar thermal heating system on his roof. He followed every procedure required by the HOA's governing documents. He submitted a complete application with all necessary documentation. The HOA chair, Miss Morrison, received that application and failed to respond within the required time frame. Then, after the system was installed, she issued a violation notice and demanded its removal. Martin walked over to a display board showing photos of my house and the solar panels. The HOA claims the system violates aesthetic standards, but Colorado law is clear. Homeowners associations cannot prohibit solar energy devices. That's not a suggestion or a guideline. It's mandatory law that supersedes any private covenant. The legislature made a policy decision that renewable energy is more important than HOA aesthetic preferences. This court should enforce that legislative policy and grant Mr. Garrison the relief he seeks. Richard Vance stood for the defense. He was older, probably in his 60s, with silver hair and an expensive suit. "Your Honor, the Meadowbrook Hills HOA is not trying to prohibit solar energy. We're simply trying to regulate its implementation in a way that protects property values and maintains community standards." Mr. Garrison could have installed his system in a less visible location. He could have used panels that matched his roof color. He could have done many things to minimize the visual impact. Instead, he installed large black panels in the most prominent location on his roof, and then claimed immunity from any regulation. Vance gestured toward Patricia. "Miss Morrison has served this community faithfully for 15 years. She takes her responsibilities seriously." When she saw Mr. Garrison's installation, she recognized immediately that it would set a precedent that could harm property values throughout the neighborhood. She acted within her authority as ARC chair to protect the community's interests. Judge Morrison listened impassively. "Let's hear the evidence. Mr. Shaw, call your first witness." "I call Brandon Garrison, Your Honor. I took the stand and was sworn in. Martin walked me through the entire timeline. My research into solar thermal systems, the decision to install one, the preparation of the application, the submission to the HOA, and the eventual violation notice. Mr. Garrison, did you receive any response to your application before you installed the system? Martin asked. No. The HOA's CCRs state that the ARC has 30 days to respond to applications. If they don't respond within that time, the application is deemed approved. I waited 35 days before scheduling the installation. And how visible is the system from the street? Barely visible. You have to stand at a specific angle about 50 feet east of my driveway to see the panels. Even then, you're only seeing about a third of the array. Martin showed photos taken from various angles on the street. In most of them, the panels were completely invisible. In one photo, taken from the specific angle I described, you could see dark rectangles on the roof, but they blended reasonably well with the roofing material. What has this system saved you in energy costs? Martin asked. My natural gas bills have dropped by about 60%. Last winter, from November through March, I saved approximately $900 compared to the previous year. Richard Vance Cross examined me aggressively. Mr. Garrison, you knew that aesthetics were important to this community when you bought your home, didn't you? Yes, but I also believed that a neat, professional installation would be acceptable. You didn't wait for actual approval from the ARC, did you? You just assumed that silence meant consent. The CCRs explicitly state that applications not rejected within 30 days are deemed approved. I followed the rules exactly. But you could have installed this system on the back of your roof, correct, where it would be completely invisible. The back of my roof faces north. Solar thermal collectors need to face south to be effective. Installing them on the north side would reduce their efficiency by about 70%, making the system economically pointless. Vance tried several more angles, but I'd prepared thoroughly with Martin. Every question had an answer backed by documentation or physical evidence. Next, Martin called my installer, Mike Rodriguez. Mike explained the technical aspects of the system, the installation process, and the legal requirements. Mr. Rodriguez, are solar thermal heating systems common in Colorado? Martin asked. Very common. We install probably 200 systems a year in the Boulder area alone. They're one of the most cost-effective renewable energy technologies available. And do you encounter HOA resistance? Occasionally, but not often. Most HOAs understand that state law protects these systems. The ones that do resist usually back down once they consult with their attorney and realize they can't win. On cross-examination, Vance tried to suggest that Mike had encouraged me to ignore the HOA's rules, but Mike calmly explained that he'd reviewed my application documents and confirmed everything was in order before proceeding with installation. The afternoon of the first day, Martin called Tom Chen, the HOA treasurer who'd voted against the violation. Tom testified that Patricia had never convened an ARC meeting to review my application and had made the decision to issue the violation unilaterally. Did you believe Mr. Garrison's application should have been approved? Martin asked. Yes. It was complete, the system looked professional, and state law protected it. I saw no valid reason for denial. On the second day, the defense presented their case. Richard Vance called Patricia to the stand. She wore the same navy suit and maintained a rigid posture that suggested defiance rather than cooperation. Miss Morrison, how long have you served on the HOA board? Vance asked. 15 years, the last 7 as president and ARC chair. And what are your primary responsibilities? To protect property values, maintain community standards, and ensure that all homeowners comply with our covenants. When you received Mr. Garrison's application, what was your assessment? Patricia's expression hardened. I immediately saw that the proposed installation would be highly visible and would create a negative precedent. If we approved Mr. Garrison's panels, we'd have to approve similar installations from other homeowners. Within a few years, our entire neighborhood could be covered in these industrial-looking devices. Did you believe the state solar exemption applied to Mr. Garrison's heating system? No. The exemption clearly refers to solar panels for electricity. Heating systems are different technology and should be treated differently. Martin's cross-examination was surgical. Miss Morrison, you received Mr. Garrison's application on August 17th, correct? I believe so. And you didn't respond within 30 days, did you? I didn't believe a response was necessary. The application was clearly non-compliant. But the CCRs require you to respond within 30 days, correct? Patricia hesitated. They say the ARC will endeavor to respond within 30 days. Martin held up a copy of the CCRs. Actually, they say the ARC shall respond within 30 days. Shall, not will endeavor. That's mandatory language, isn't it? I suppose. And the CCRs also state that the ARC is a committee, not a single individual. Yet you made the decision to reject Mr. Garrison's application without consulting any other committee members, didn't you? I consulted informally. With whom? Patricia faltered. I don't recall specifically. You don't recall. This was less than a year ago. Surely you remember whether you called a meeting or sent emails to other committee members. I made the decision based on my experience and judgment. So you made it alone, in violation of the CCR's requirement for committee review. I had the authority as chair. Martin pulled out another document. Let's talk about other applications you've approved over the years. You approved Craig Peterson's deck addition with just your signature, correct? That was different. How was it different? It was a minor modification. A 400-square-foot deck is minor, but a solar heating system is major. Yes. And you approved Rebecca Phillips' new paint color without committee review, didn't you? Paint colors are routine. But the CCRs list exterior paint colors as requiring ARC approval, just like roof-mounted equipment. Yet you treated one as routine and the other as worthy of rejection. Why? Patricia's face flushed. Each application is judged on its own merits. Or judged based on whether you personally like the homeowner and the modification they're requesting. Objection, Vance called. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Morrison said. Rephrase, Mr. Shaw. Miss Morrison, have you ever had any personal disputes with Mr. Garrison prior to this matter? Patricia's eyes flashed. He's been difficult since he moved into the neighborhood, always questioning board decisions, always pushing back on rules. Can you give me an example? He complained about the landscaping company we hired, said they were overpriced. He voted against raising HOA dues even though we needed the revenue. So he exercised his rights as a homeowner to question board decisions and vote according to his conscience. He was disruptive. And you decided to reject his solar system application because you found him disruptive. No, I rejected it because it violated community standards. But you just testified that you considered him difficult and disruptive. That seems like a personal bias that influenced your decision. Patricia pressed her lips together. I made the decision based on the merits. Martin spent another 30 minutes picking apart Patricia's testimony, exposing inconsistencies and contradictions. By the time he finished, Patricia looked exhausted and angry. Vance called several other homeowners who testified that they opposed visible roof equipment. and believed Patricia had acted appropriately to protect property values. But under cross-examination, most admitted they didn't actually understand the technical differences between solar thermal and photovoltaic systems, and none could point to any evidence that my installation had harmed property values. On the third day, both sides presented closing arguments. Vance argued that HOAs needed reasonable authority to regulate aesthetics, and that the solar exemption should be interpreted narrowly. Martin argued that the law was clear and unambiguous, and that Patricia had violated both state law and the HOA's own procedures. Judge Morrison listened carefully, taking notes throughout both presentations. When they finished, she leaned back in her chair. "I'll take this matter under advisement," she said. "You'll have my decision within 30 days. The waiting was excruciating. I tried to focus on work and normal life, but the case hung over everything. I'd invested so much time, money, and emotional energy into fighting the HOA. If I lost, I'd have to remove the system, pay the accumulated fines, and cover my own legal bills. It would be financially devastating." 3 weeks later, Martin called me at work. "We won," he said simply. I nearly dropped my phone. "What?" Judge Morrison issued her ruling this morning. Complete victory. She found that Colorado's solar exemption applies to thermal systems, that Patricia violated the CCRs by failing to respond properly to your application, and that the HOA acted with selective enforcement and personal bias. She's ordering the HOA to allow your system to remain, to reimburse all your legal fees, and to adopt new policies ensuring that solar systems are treated consistently going forward. I sat down heavily in my chair. We actually won. We definitely won. And there's more. Judge Morrison was pretty blunt in her written order. She specifically criticized Patricia for abusing her authority and making decisions based on personal animosity rather than legitimate community interests. She's ordering the HOA to allow any homeowner who wants to install a solar thermal or photovoltaic system to do so, subject only to reasonable safety and structural requirements. So this applies to everyone, not just me. Exactly. The judge essentially rewrote the HOA's rules to comply with state law. Any homeowner in Meadowbrook Hills can now install solar systems without fear of HOA retaliation. The relief I felt was overwhelming. Nearly 9 months of stress, conflict, and uncertainty had finally ended in victory. The HOA received the judge's order the same day. According to Tom Chen, who called me that evening, the board held an emergency meeting. Patricia argued for appealing the decision, but the other board members refused. The legal bills had already exceeded $40,000, depleting most of the HOA's reserve fund. An appeal would cost tens of thousands more with little chance of success. She actually resigned from the board, Tom told me. Just stood up, said she couldn't work with people who wouldn't defend the community, and walked out. It was pretty dramatic. Good riddance, I said. Within 2 weeks of the judge's order, 3 other homeowners contacted me asking about solar thermal systems. Deanne Wilson and her husband were first. They hired Mike Rodriguez and had their system installed by the end of summer. 2 other neighbors followed soon after. The new HOA board, with James Hartford serving as interim president, adopted comprehensive solar energy guidelines consistent with the judge's order. Applications would be processed within the required 30-day window. Systems would be approved as long as they met basic safety standards and were installed by licensed contractors. Aesthetic considerations could be noted, but couldn't be grounds for rejection. The HOA also had to reimburse me for all my legal fees, which totaled just over $11,000. They waived all the accumulated fines, and they sent me a formal letter apologizing for the improper handling of my application. Patricia's resignation created an immediate opening on the board. At the next general membership meeting, I was nominated and elected to fill her seat. It felt like poetic justice. Over the following year, 7 more homes in Meadowbrook Hills added solar systems of various types. Some were thermal collectors like mine. Others were photovoltaic panels generating electricity. One homeowner even installed a hybrid system that did both. The neighborhood didn't turn into an industrial park, as Patricia had predicted. Property values remained stable and even increased slightly, likely because energy-efficient homes were becoming more desirable to buyers. The case attracted attention beyond our neighborhood. A local newspaper ran a story about the lawsuit and the judge's decision. An environmental advocacy group used it as an example in their lobbying efforts for stronger renewable energy protections. Martin Shaw presented the case at a conference on HOA law, noting how it clarified Colorado's solar exemption statute. For me, the whole experience was exhausting but ultimately rewarding. I'd stood up for what I believed was right, even when it meant significant financial risk and months of stress. I'd proven that HOAs couldn't simply ignore state law or abuse their authority without consequences. And I'd helped establish a precedent that would benefit other homeowners facing similar situations. The solar thermal system continued to perform excellently. Over the first full year, it reduced my natural gas consumption by 63%, saving me over $1,000 in utility bills. The system would pay for itself in about 10 years, maybe sooner if energy prices continued to rise. More importantly, it was reducing my carbon footprint significantly, contributing to the fight against climate change in a small but meaningful way. I remained on the HOA board for the next 2 years. We worked to streamline processes, increase transparency, and focus on genuine community improvement rather than petty enforcement of aesthetic rules. James Hartford served as president and did an excellent job rebuilding trust and cooperation among homeowners. We revised many of the outdated and overly restrictive provisions in the CCRs. Holiday decorations could stay up longer. Trash cans could be visible from the street as long as they were neat and maintained. Satellite dishes were explicitly allowed. We even changed the grass height requirement from 3 inches to 4 inches, which made lawn maintenance easier for everyone and reduced water consumption. The neighborhood became friendlier and more relaxed. People stopped worrying about minor violations and focused on being good neighbors. The Facebook group shifted from complaints and enforcement discussions to genuine community building, sharing recommendations for contractors, organizing social events, and supporting neighbors in need. One unexpected benefit came about 18 months after the lawsuit ended. A family with a severely disabled child moved into the neighborhood. They needed to install a wheelchair ramp at their front entrance, which technically required ARC approval. In the old days, Patricia probably would have demanded that the ramp be hidden or relocated to a side entrance. Instead, the new board approved the ramp immediately and even organized a neighborhood work party to help with the installation. That incident reminded me why HOAs should exist in the first place. To build community and help neighbors, not to enforce arbitrary rules and personal preferences. The lawsuit and its aftermath taught me several important lessons. First, documentation is everything. If I hadn't kept meticulous records of my application, the certified mail receipt, and all my correspondence with the HOA, the case would have been much harder to win. Second, knowing your rights under state law is crucial. HOAs often rely on homeowners' ignorance or unwillingness to challenge their authority. When you know what the law actually says, you can stand up to overreach effectively. Third, persistence matters. The lawsuit was expensive, stressful, and time-consuming. Many times I was tempted to just give up and remove the system, but I believed I was right, and I stuck with it through the finish. I also learned that change is possible within HOA systems. Patricia Morrison had run the association like a personal fiefdom for years, and most homeowners had accepted it because challenging her seemed too difficult. But once she was gone, the entire culture shifted quickly. People realized that the HOA could be a positive force rather than a source of stress and conflict. 2 years after the lawsuit, I was having coffee on my back patio again, just like that October morning when Patricia had marched up my driveway with her violation notice. But this time, the atmosphere was completely different. The sun was warming the solar thermal collectors on my roof, heating water that would reduce my natural gas consumption that day and every day. 3 other houses visible from my patio had similar systems on their roofs. The neighborhood looked modern and forward-thinking, not industrial or ugly. Deanne Wilson walked by on the sidewalk, walking her dog. She waved and called out, "Hey, Brandon, our solar system is working great. We saved $200 last month," I waved back. "That's awesome." It just gets better over time. Mike Rodriguez sent me a text later that day. He was installing another system in Meadowbrook Hills, his 12th in the neighborhood. The judge's ruling had been great for his business, and he'd referred several clients to Martin Shaw for HOA issues in other communities. The whole experience had started with a simple desire to reduce my energy costs and environmental impact. It had evolved into a fight over property rights, state law, and HOA authority. It had ended with a legal victory that benefited not just me, but potentially thousands of Colorado homeowners living under HOA restrictions. Looking back, I wouldn't change anything except maybe having a better relationship with Patricia from the start. But her personality and approach to HOA governance made conflict inevitable. Someone was eventually going to challenge her authority. It just happened to be me, fighting over solar thermal collectors. The best part was knowing that other homeowners wouldn't have to go through what I'd experienced. The judge's order had established clear precedent. Solar systems were protected in Colorado, period. HOAs could impose reasonable safety requirements, but they couldn't prohibit installations based on aesthetics or personal preference. That was the law, clearly stated and enforced. I served out my term on the HOA board and then stepped down, satisfied that we'd reformed the organization and established better practices. James Hartford continued as president and did an excellent job. The neighborhood thrived, property values increased, and community spirit improved dramatically. 5 years after the initial violation notice, I was still living in the same house with the same solar thermal system, still saving money on energy bills, still reducing my carbon footprint. The legal bills had long since been reimbursed and forgotten. The stress and conflict had faded into memory, replaced by satisfaction at having stood up for my rights and won. The system itself was maintenance-free and trouble-free. Mike Rodriguez came by once a year for a quick inspection, but there were never any issues. The collectors continued to capture solar radiation efficiently, even in the middle of Colorado winters. The return on investment had exceeded my expectations. More importantly, the precedent established by the lawsuit continued to help other homeowners. Martin Shaw had handled 3 more similar cases in other Colorado communities, all of which settled quickly once he cited the Garrison v. Meadowbrook Hills decision. Homeowners associations across the state revised their policies to comply with the clear mandate from Judge Morrison's ruling. The environmental impact extended beyond just my house or even my neighborhood. By establishing that HOAs couldn't prohibit solar installations, the lawsuit removed a significant barrier to renewable energy adoption. Thousands of Colorado homes were governed by HOA covenants. Many homeowners had avoided installing solar systems because they feared HOA retaliation. Now they knew the law protected them, and installations increased significantly. An energy policy researcher from the University of Colorado even cited the case in a paper about regulatory barriers to residential solar adoption. She estimated that the ruling had contributed to a 15% increase in residential solar installations across HOA-governed communities in Colorado over the following 3 years. That translated to significant carbon emissions reductions and energy cost savings for hundreds of families. I never imagined that my fight over a roof heating system would have such broad implications. I'd just been trying to reduce my utility bills and do something positive for the environment. But by standing up to Patricia Morrison and the Meadowbrook Hills HOA, I'd helped establish important legal protections for renewable energy and homeowner rights. The story became something I shared with friends and colleagues, a reminder that individual action and persistence could create meaningful change. It wasn't always easy or pleasant. The stress during the lawsuit had been intense, and there were moments when I questioned whether the fight was worth it. But looking at the solar collectors on my roof, and knowing that dozens of other families had been able to install similar systems because of the legal precedent, I knew absolutely that it had been worthwhile. Patricia Morrison moved out of Meadowbrook Hills about 3 years after her resignation from the board. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she'd bought a house in a different community, where presumably she could be just another homeowner without board responsibilities. I bore her no ill will by that point. Her rigid approach to HOA governance had caused the conflict, but in a strange way, she'd also created the opportunity for positive change. If she'd simply approved my application or ignored the solar system, none of the subsequent improvements would have happened. The new HOA board under James Hartford's leadership continued to be reasonable and community-focused. They approved a community garden project, updated the playground equipment near the clubhouse, and even installed LED streetlights that reduced energy consumption and light pollution. The association became what it should have been all along, a tool for genuine community improvement rather than petty enforcement of arbitrary rules. My relationship with my neighbors strengthened considerably. People who'd been neutral or even somewhat supportive of Patricia during the lawsuit came to appreciate that I'd been fighting for everyone's rights, not just my own. The ability to make reasonable modifications to homes without excessive HOA interference benefited all homeowners, whether they installed solar systems or not. The whole experience also deepened my interest in renewable energy and environmental issues. I joined the board of a local environmental nonprofit and volunteered with solar installation training programs. If my legal battle could help remove barriers to clean energy adoption, I wanted to build on that momentum in other ways. 10 years after that October morning when Patricia marched up my driveway, I was still living in the same house. The solar thermal system was still working perfectly, still saving money, still reducing emissions. More than 20 homes in Meadowbrook Hills had various solar installations. The neighborhood had become known locally as a leader in residential renewable energy adoption. Judge Morrison's ruling had stood the test of time. No appellate court had overturned it. The Colorado legislature had even amended the solar rights statute to make it even more explicit, specifically listing thermal systems alongside photovoltaic panels. The legal protection I'd fought for was now stronger than ever. I eventually sold the house and moved to Oregon for a job opportunity, but the new owners were thrilled about the solar system. It had become a selling point rather than a liability, adding value to the property. The real estate agent specifically mentioned it in the listing, noting the energy cost savings and environmental benefits. Before I left Colorado, I had coffee with Martin Shaw one last time. We talked about the case and its lasting impact. "You know what made your case special," Martin said. "You had the courage to fight when most people would have just given in. Patricia was counting on you backing down. When you didn't, when you were willing to go all the way to trial, you forced the issue. That's what created the precedent." "I just didn't want to remove a system I'd legally installed," I said. "And because you stood firm, hundreds of other homeowners didn't have to fight the same battle. That's the power of precedent." It was a fitting conclusion to a story that had started with a simple home improvement project and evolved into a significant legal victory for homeowner rights and renewable energy. I'd never intended to become an advocate or test case. I just wanted to heat my home efficiently and sustainably. But sometimes standing up for what's right, even in small ways, creates ripples that extend far beyond the original situation. The solar thermal collectors on my Colorado roof had done more than save me money and reduce emissions. They'd become symbols of the principle that homeowners associations must respect state law and individual rights, that environmental progress matters more than aesthetic uniformity, and that one person's determination to do the right thing can create lasting positive change for an entire community.